Earlier this week, we got a surprise release of a new Unearthed Arcana, this time for the Forgotten Realms subclasses. It contained 8 new or revised subclasses for 2024, and shockingly, most of them are actually new. 5 of the 8 are brand new, with only 3 being revised. What we got in this UA is the College of the Moon Bard, the Knowledge Domain Cleric, the Purple Dragon Knight Fighter, the Oath of the Noble Genies Paladin, the Winter Walker Ranger, the Scion of the Three Rogue, the Spellfire Sorcerer, and the Bladesinger Wizard. There's a lot of really great things in this UA, and obviously not everything is perfect, but hey, it's all playtest material, and that's exactly the point. The intent is for us to go through it, play some games with the subclasses, and give our feedback on how everything feels in play. The subclass that really stood out to me that I wanted to go over today is the Winter Walker Ranger. I've had a lot of thoughts about the revised 2024 version of the Ranger class, and I've gone over it a few times already. Some thoughts I'm going to be sharing again since I don't really expect everyone to have memorized everything that I've ever said. But anyway, without too much else, let's just get into our discussion of the new Winter Walker Ranger. But before we do that, I do want to give a huge shout out to all of my channel members, but especially Julian Finiki and the Crimson Witch in the Champion tier, as well as Jackal3, Dill, and Pupstar Production in the Hero tier. You guys rock, and I sincerely appreciate you, and thank you all for your continued support. So, Rangers. Whether you think it was for better or worse, the class has lost a lot of the previous identity that they had in 2014 relating to different terrains and regions. The heavy focus on that in 2014 resulted in a few too many features being pretty niche, but then the heavy deviation from that stance in 2014 has caused many to say that the class has lost a little bit of its charm. I don't want to read too much into it based on only a few examples, but instead, it seems like we might be bringing back some of those elements in the subclasses, and maybe less terrain and more planes of existence. We had the Feywander representing the Feywild, the Gloomstalker which was connected to the Shadowfell, and the Hunter and Beastmaster likely tying to the Material Plane, and now we get the Winter Walker still on the Material Plane, but focusing more on the frigid zones of it. Anyway, we're going to start off by reading the flavor text since it's actually pretty cool and will help to give you an idea of what the intent of where the subclass is heading. Winter Walkers hone their craft in the bleak and frozen wilds of places like Icewind Dale. Rhymed with ice, these ruthless rangers hunt the monsters that haunt Arctic wastelands, eventually becoming frigid terrors themselves. More so than any other rangers of Icewind Dale, Winter Walkers are known to be well versed in the paranormal phenomena specific to the realm, including the latent magic of fallen Netherese cities, endemic monsters like Yetis and Cragcats, and the rising threat of Underdark invaders. In exchange for their cold pragmatism, terrifying magic, and mastery of the region, these Winter Walkers are regarded with equal parts respect and fear. 10 Town citizens say that it is Winter Walkers' frequent exposure to malignant entities that gives them their fearsome powers. Many Regad nomads, on the other hand, believe that nature spirits bestow Winter Walkers with a unique curse. I'm just gonna say it, that I love this description. It sounds so cool, and it's giving me vibes of the Night's Watch from Game of Thrones as well as the White Walkers. These fearsome warriors who brave the cold in the thankless mission only to almost become a fragment of what they are hunting. It's an aesthetic that really appeals to me and something I'm finding myself very drawn to. But let's see how they translate it to the features themselves. Starting at 3rd level, when we get access to our subclass, we get Frigid Explorer. This feature gives us straight up resistance to cold damage. No conditions, no activations, no limited use, nothing like that. It's just always active from the moment we become Winter Walkers. And I mean, thematically, that makes a ton of sense for the subclass, so I'm totally here for it. Resistances are also shaping up to be more valuable than ever in 2024, with many of the examples of monsters that we've seen from the new monster manual are showing enemies consistently using more and a wider variety of damage types, so this could be exceptionally useful, especially in a campaign that takes place somewhere like Icewind Dale. Also, starting next week, I'm going to be having a ton of coverage about the new monster manual, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. So in addition to all of that, still as part of our Frigid Explorer feature, we also get Polar Strikes, which allows us to deal an additional 1d4 cold damage to a target whenever we hit it with a weapon. The damage can only be dealt once per turn, and straight up ignores resistance to cold damage, which is pretty amazing, honestly. Obviously, a lot remains to be seen about the new monsters, but in 2014, cold damage was among the most resisted damage types in the game, and this would be especially true if you were using this subclass in some kind of Icewind Dale type adventure. So it's great to see that they've considered that. The damage also increases to 1d6 at 11th level, so admittedly this isn't anything earth-shattering, but it's still a nice small free bonus. An interesting point of comparison is to the Fey Wanderer's Dreadful Strikes, which is nearly identical in concept, but the execution is a little bit different. Dreadful Strikes also grants 1d4 psychic damage on a hit once per turn, which also increases to 1d6 at 11th level. However, the feature doesn't provide resistance to psychic damage, nor does it bypass psychic resistance itself. I don't know exactly whether this makes Frigid Explorer strictly better, since the difference in damage type is likely to be quite relevant here. Is psychic damage simply less common than cold damage? Are creatures also less likely to be resistant to psychic damage, thus negating the need for the resistance bypass? It's all a little bit unclear until we really get our hands on the new monster manual. I think it largely comes down to the fact that cold damage and its resistance are likely more setting specific, whereas psychic damage seems to be a little bit more general and can appear more commonly anywhere. Next up, and also at 3rd level, we get Hunter's Rime. This is yet another feature tied to our Hunter's Mark. What it does is let us, when we cast Hunter's Mark, to gain temporary hit points equal to 1d10 plus our spellcasting modifier. The way this works is a bit strange, considering that our 10th level ranger feature, Tireless, requires them to use an entire action to gain 1d8 plus wisdom modifier hit points that you're then limited to using an amount of times equal to your wisdom modifier. Presumably, Tireless is more intended to be used outside of combat, but I mean, there's nothing stopping you from using Hunter's Mark outside of combat either. One other point to note about the temporary hit point gain is that it activates on casting Hunter's Mark and not moving it to a new target. This may encourage you to use more of your free casts of the spell to continue to add more temporary hit points, so it will require a little bit more active thought than just leaving it active and moving it around. Just food for thought. In addition to all that though, Hunter's Rime also makes it so that creatures affected by your Hunter's Mark can't take the disengage action. I'm not confident how much this is going to matter, as I don't suspect many monsters are actively using their disengage action. Again, unless of course we see many new monsters receive ways of using it as a bonus action or as part of another action. Alright, so I won't dwell on it for too long, but I do want to, once again, touch on the reality of so heavily embedding the use of Hunter's Mark into the Ranger. 4 of the base Ranger's class features revolve around Hunter's Mark: Favorite Enemy, Relentless Hunter, Precise Hunter, and Foe Slayer. The bulk of these, with the exception of Favorite Enemy, arrive later on in the class progression. When we initially saw the reveal of the class, this prompted many to say that it's not such a big deal since no one plays a Ranger into Tier 3 and 4 anyway, which, as far as I can tell, is implicit acknowledgement of the poor design. It's basically saying, since no one's going to play it anyway, it doesn't matter. Which I don't think should ever be how a class is designed. The thing is though, that now we're starting to see more and more interactions with Hunter's Mark at lower levels. Hunter's Rime comes online to 3rd level, and both the Beastmaster and Hunter subclasses have other early features as well. What this functionally does could be problematic, as it mechanically paints both the class and the design team into a little bit of a corner. If at any point during your adventuring career you decide to stop using Hunter's Mark, you're effectively losing 4 class features, and potentially some subclass features too. And there's plenty of reasons why you might just want to skip the spell. Even if you aren't necessarily losing anything because the spells that you're using instead of Hunter's Mark are quote-unquote better, there is still this perceptible and experiential loss. It's hard to not feel like you're not losing access to a large part of what makes your class and subclass special just because you wanted to take broader advantage of another of your class features: spellcasting. I love class synergies, and when different features play off of each other and encourage creative play or open up new avenues. It's not that. It's not synergistic in that it comes at the expense of other things. It's saying use Hunter's Mark or don't use those features. And that just doesn't feel all that great. I'll maintain, as I have since we saw the 2024 Ranger revealed, that a Hunter's Mark focus could have been an excellent inclusion as a subclass of its own, rather than being built into the base class and then dotted throughout the subclasses. I see what they're doing. I get it. It's just not a design direction that I'm all that into. Alright, let's move on. Also at 3rd level, we get yet another feature. We get our Winter Walker spells. Here we get Ice Knife, Pass Without Trace, Remove Curse, Ice Storm, and Cone of Cold at 3rd, 5th, 9th, 13th, and 17th levels respectively. This is a solid list. Basically, every Ranger ever picks up Pass Without Trace, so it's nice to always have these prepared for you. I don't really have that much else to say about it. Next, at 7th level, Fortifying Soul allows us, when we finish a short rest, to select a number of creatures equal to our Wisdom modifier and allow them to regain 1d10 plus our Ranger level hit points, and they get advantage on saving throws to avoid or end the frightened condition for the next 1 hour, and this can all be used only once per long rest. This is consistent with other 7th level Ranger features, which offer some form of defensive buff. However, it is worth noting that the Fey Wanderer's Beguiling Twist, also at 7th level, provides advantage on saving throws to avoid or end both the charmed and frightened conditions, and it allows you to use a reaction to potentially charm or frighten a different target under certain circumstances. So this leaves me a little bit lukewarm on this feature. Regaining additional hit points is nice, but might not be applicable if your party members are already maxed out. I suppose a more subtle benefit is that it can help to conserve some hit dice, especially since, unlike the old Bard's Song of Rest, it doesn't require the targets to have spent any hit dice to gain the benefit from it. So it's hard to say that this is bad, but it ends up leaving it feeling a little bit more situational. But I think the real killer here is the timing on the advantage on the saving throws. It only lasts for 1 hour, so you essentially need to know that you're literally about to walk into a fight where hopefully the advantage will be relevant, since you only get it once per long rest and only after your short rest. It just makes this feature very challenging to actually derive value from. I get why they wanted to reduce the time frame to 1 hour. They didn't want to essentially give an entire party permanent advantage on saving throws against being frightened, but I wonder if there's a better balance here. Maybe making it last for 8 hours or something, but have it only apply to the next saving throw to end or avoid being frightened. I'm not sure. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like this could be reworked, which, I mean, is literally the point of UA. Moving on to Chilling Retribution, our 11th level feature, this allows us to, when we are hit with an attack roll, to use our reaction to force the creature to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they're frightened and their speed is set to 0 until the end of our next turn. This is pretty cool thematically, in that it's like it freezes them in place. However, we are limited to using it an amount of times equal to our wisdom modifier per long rest. I like this feature, I'm just not sure that it needed the saving throw. As a point of comparison again, Stalker's Flurry from the Gloomstalker provided both additional damage and the option of a mass fear effect that can hit multiple targets, but did not require the use of any additional resource other than the attack that you were already making. Granted, one here is obviously active and likely happening on your turn, whereas the other is reactive. That said, I feel like the reaction cost was likely enough. Again, I'm not sure about this and I could be totally off base, so I'm happy to hear your thoughts in the comments. And finally, at 15th level, we get Frozen Haunt. This feature allows us, when we cast Hunter's Mark, to transform into a ghostly snowy form. When we do so, we gain a few benefits. Firstly, we get full-on immunity to cold damage. Amazing. Additionally, on the turn that we adopt our form, and at the start of every other turn thereafter, each creature of our choice within a 15-foot emanation takes 2d4 cold damage. Admittedly, no, it's not a ton, but importantly, it requires 0 resource expenditure beyond the initial cast of Hunter's Mark. No bonus action, and it's multi-target. The downside here being that we do still need to maintain our concentration on our Hunter's Mark. And it should be noted that by this point, we have already unlocked our Relentless Hunter feature, which prevents damage from breaking our concentration on Hunter's Mark, so it does become far easier to maintain. Then, in addition to that, we also gain immunity to the grappled, prone, and restrained conditions, and can pass through creatures and objects as if they were difficult terrain, taking 1d10 force damage if we end our turn in the space of something else. This feature provides a ton of defensive boons to us, and is a really great feature overall. I just hate that it's connected to Hunter's Mark, and honestly, I see no reason for it being tied to it either, other than wanting to have a defined and limited amount of time that it can be used. I just don't think that it's necessary. They can just as easily have it be activated as a bonus action and provide all of the same effects that last for 1 minute or until you become incapacitated or something like that. Especially since by this level, concentration on Hunter's Mark isn't dropping with damage anyway. It almost feels like the only reason they did it was so that you couldn't stack it with Conjure Woodland Beings and have 2 emanations active at the same time, which feels wholly unnecessary for 15th level. But hey, I'm just speculating. Oh, and you also only get to use it once per long rest, unless you spend a level 4 or higher spell slot to unlock it again. So it gets pretty expensive considering you only have 2 of those by the time that you get this feature. And again, has no connection to Hunter's Mark at all. All in all, I think this has the potential to be a very cool, fun, and flavorful subclass. I love the theme of it. I just think it needs a little bit more tightening up to feel more usable. But overall, I think it's in a pretty okay place. I think my biggest concern about it is that it's a very defensive-focused subclass with not a lot of ways to capitalize on that. That's not an inherently bad thing though. The base ranger just doesn't feel all that competitive with other classes in tiers 3 and 4, and I don't feel like the Winter Walker offers enough to overcome that discrepancy, though the spells do help a bit. Most of all, I just wish that we didn't keep having such a heavy reliance on Hunter's Mark, but I don't think that's going anywhere given the direction that they took with the class in 2024. But I do really hope that they drop the requirement for the Frozen Haunt capstone though. There's still time. That's all I got. Consider checking out some of my other D&D videos, but otherwise, take care.